Jake had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. The small ranch tucked away from the buzz of the city had always been his sanctuary. The quiet lake at the edge of his property was his favorite spot, a place where he could pitch a tent, listen to the water lap against the shore, simply breathe. He arrived early Saturday morning, the sun casting golden light over the tall pines and wildflowers. Unloading his gear with practiced ease, Jake felt the familiar calm settle over him. He set up his tent near the water's edge, stacked firewood, and breathed in the fresh pine-scented air. This was his land, his peaceful retreat. But that calm was shattered less than an hour later. A rumble of tires on gravel caught his attention. Jake looked up just in time to see two police cruisers pull up near the lake, his brow furrowed in confusion. The officers stepped out and approached, badges glinting in the sunlight. "Good morning, sir," one said. "We received a call that someone was camping in a restricted area. Can you tell me what you're doing here?" Jake blinked. "I'm camping on my own property. This is my ranch." The officers exchanged a glance. "The neighborhood association reports this area as restricted property. We'll have to verify your claim." Jake's heart sank. How could there be a misunderstanding about his own land? He pulled out his phone and opened a digital copy of his property deed. "Here," he said, showing the officers the map and documents. "This lake and the surrounding land belong to me. I have all the rights to be here." One of the officers nodded, but said, "We still need to verify this with the association. For now, we'll need to report what we've seen." Jake felt frustration rise, but kept his tone calm. "Please, I don't want any trouble. I just want to enjoy my own land." The officers took notes, asked a few more questions, and promised to pass along the information. Then they left. But the tension lingered as Jake sat back down by the lake. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd always respected the neighborhood's guidelines and never imagined that he would be the subject of such a report. He thought about the neighbors he'd met at past gatherings, friendly faces who appreciated the quiet and the beauty of the ranch lands. Surely this must be a misunderstanding. But who had called the police? And why? That afternoon, Jake decided to visit the association's office. The receptionist greeted him politely, but when he asked to speak with the leadership, the atmosphere shifted. The association manager explained that some residents had raised concerns about people camping near the lake, worried it might affect shared spaces. Jake listened, realizing that perhaps the association's records were unclear about the exact boundaries. He left with a commitment from the manager to review the maps and get back to him. Back at his cabin, Jake pulled out his property documents, looking over every detail. The lake was clearly marked within his land. He wasn't trespassing. He was defending his own property. Yet, the association seemed to believe otherwise. That evening, Jake sat by the campfire, flames crackling and stars beginning to twinkle above. The peaceful night contrasted sharply with the day's disruption. He realized that if he wanted to keep enjoying his ranch lake, he'd need to dig deeper, understand the root of the confusion, and stand firm. His quiet weekend retreat had turned into the start of a complicated journey, but Jake was ready. After that unsettling weekend by the lake, Jake couldn't shake the nagging doubt that had settled in his mind. He'd always known the boundaries of his ranch, or so he thought. But the visit from the police and the neighborhood association's concerns hinted at something deeper. Something that required a closer look. Determined to get to the bottom of the situation, Jake began his investigation. The first step was to review every document he could find related to his property. He pulled out the original deed, property maps, surveys, correspondence he'd received when he purchased the ranch years ago, sitting at his kitchen table. Jake spread the documents out before him. The faded ink and detailed lines on the maps told a clear story. The lake and the surrounding land belonged to him, all within the borders defined in his deed. He noted the exact acreage and compared it carefully to the boundaries listed in the neighborhood association's description. There was no mention of shared ownership or common areas overlapping with his lake. The land was his unambiguously still. He wasn't a lawyer or a real estate expert, and the legal language was sometimes hard to follow. To ensure he wasn't missing something, Jake reached out to Marlene, local real estate consultant he'd worked with before Narlene agreed to meet him at the ranch. Together, they walked the perimeter of the lake. Marlene carefully examining the land and cross-referencing it with her own copies of public records. "It looks like your property lines are solid," she said thoughtfully. "It's from what I can see, the lake and the adjacent land are all part of your deed. The association's claims don't match up with the public records." Jake felt a mix of relief and frustration. Then why did they call the police? And why are they insisting it's shared property? Marlene shrugged. Sometimes neighborhood associations work from outdated or incomplete maps. Or there can be misunderstandings about what land is managed by the association versus what's private. That explained the confusion, but didn't solve the problem. If the association genuinely believed the lake was part of their managed areas, they might continue to interfere. "Do you think I should get a lawyer involved?" Jake asked. "It's a good idea," Marlene replied. "A lawyer who specializes in property law can help you protect your rights and communicate clearly with the association." Jake agreed and soon made an appointment with Alex, a seasoned real estate attorney recommended by Marlene. At their first meeting, Alex reviewed all the documents and listened carefully as Jake recounted the police visit and the association's stance. "This isn't uncommon," Alex said. "Neighborhood associations sometimes overreach because of unclear boundaries or outdated records. The key is to address this with clear evidence and formal communication." Alex drafted a letter for Jake to send to the association, outlining his ownership, attaching copies of the deed and surveys, and requesting an official meeting to resolve the confusion. Jake felt a surge of determination. He wasn't going to be pushed off his own land. But more than that, he wanted to rebuild a respectful relationship with the association, one based on facts and open dialogue. The next step was clear: meet with the association's leadership and present his case. As Jake prepared for that meeting, he took comfort in the quiet of his ranch. The lake shimmered under the afternoon sun, a reminder of why this place mattered so much to him. This land was more than property. It was his refuge, his home, and he was ready to defend it. Jake arrived at the neighborhood association's office with a mix of determination and hope. After days of digging through documents and consulting experts, he was ready to clear the air. He wasn't looking for a fight, just a respectful conversation based on facts. Inside the modest meeting room, a few board members awaited him. Among them was Mr. Caldwell, the association's president, and Mrs. Harper, who oversaw property and land use. Their expressions were polite but cautious, signaling the seriousness of the discussion. Jake began by laying out his evidence: the deed to his ranch, detailed property maps, and the expert opinion from Marlene, the real estate consultant. Explained how the lake and the surrounding land were. It's clearly marked as part of his private property. "I understand there's been some confusion," Jake said calmly, "but I want to make sure we're all on the same page about where the boundaries lie." Mr. Caldwell nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming, Jake. We appreciate your willingness to discuss this openly." From the association's perspective, some residents have used the lake area, believing it to be part of the neighborhood's shared space. That's why concerns were raised, Mrs. Harper added. "Our records are based on older maps and some input from longtime residents. It's possible the documents we have aren't fully accurate." Jake listened, realizing that the problem wasn't just about ownership, but about how information had been passed along and interpreted. "Would it be helpful if we worked together to update the maps?" Jake offered. "We can share my surveys and deeds to create a clearer picture." "That's a good idea," Mr. Caldwell agreed. "We want to avoid any future misunderstandings." As the meeting continued, a few more board members joined in, asking questions about the property lines and how the lake had been used over the years. Jake explained that he had always kept the area private for family use and occasional camping. never intending to exclude neighbors, but emphasizing that it was his land. Going forward, "I'm open to discussing how the space can be used respectfully," Jake said. "But it needs to be clear what belongs to whom." The board members seemed to appreciate his openness. Mrs. Harper even suggested involving a professional surveyor to help update the association's records accurately before wrapping up. Mr. Caldwell spoke candidly. "Jake, we want to maintain harmony in the neighborhood. We understand this has been a difficult situation, but we hope this meeting marks a fresh start." Jake nodded, feeling the tension ease. "I agree. Let's keep communication open and make sure everyone knows the facts." As he left the office, Jake felt a cautious optimism. The meeting hadn't solved everything, but it was a significant step. The association had acknowledged the need for clearer information and showed willingness to work together. Still, Jake knew the path ahead required patience. Maps needed updating, conversations needed to continue, and trust needed rebuilding. Back at his ranch, Jake stood by the lake watching the sunlight dance on the water. He thought about how easy it had been for assumptions to create conflict, assumptions that could be corrected with openness and facts. The lake was his sanctuary. But it was also part of a larger neighborhood where relationships mattered. Jake hoped this was the beginning of a new chapter. One where respect and understanding guided every step in the weeks following the meeting. Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just protecting his land anymore, he was helping to clarify the story of the neighborhood itself. But as he dug deeper into the association's records, he quickly realized the challenge was greater than he'd anticipated. Sitting in the quiet of his home office, Jake spread out a pile of documents the association had reluctantly shared. There were maps, meeting minutes, correspondence, and reports dating back decades. Some of the maps were faded and hand-drawn, others printed and typed. But none were fully consistent with one another. One map showed the lake as a private parcel within Jake's ranch boundaries. Another suggested a sliver of the shoreline was marked as shared space. In yet another document, the association claimed responsibility for the surrounding trails and access points near the water. But with no clear legal basis, Jake frowned. The lack of clarity explained a lot. If the association's leadership was relying on outdated or contradictory records, it was no wonder neighbors had different understandings of the lake's status. The more he examined the records, the more anomalies he found. A handful of longtime residents had used parts of the lake for fishing or small gatherings, apparently with informal permission from past association leaders. But none of those permissions had ever been formally documented or included in updated boundary lines. Jake realized this informal use had contributed to the confusion, blurring the line between personal and shared space. Determined to get a clearer picture, Jake started visiting neighbors to collect their stories. He listened to tales of past fishing trips, picnics by the lake, and even small celebrations that took place without any official notice. Some neighbors expressed surprise to learn that the lake was private property, while others admitted they'd always thought it was a common area. These conversations painted a picture of a community with good intentions but a lack of clear communication. Over the years, assumptions had filled the gaps where documentation was missing. Jake also uncovered an unexpected detail. A few association members had used the lake area for personal purposes without formal agreements. This revelation explained why the association might have defended its claims so strongly. Some members had developed a personal interest in maintaining access, realizing this was more than just a boundary dispute. Jake knew he needed to be careful and strategic. It wasn't about confrontation, but about setting clear, fair boundaries for everyone's benefit. With this in mind, Jake reached out to a professional land surveyor. The surveyor arrived the next week and began a thorough review of the property. Lines around the lake, using modern technology and referencing the latest legal documents. After several days of work, The surveyor presented a detailed, up-to-date map showing exactly where Jake's property ended and where the association's land began, if any. The results were clear. The entire lake and its shoreline fell within Jake's property lines. There was no overlap with the association's managed areas. Armed with this new, professional map, Jake felt more confident than ever to move forward. He scheduled another meeting with the association's leadership to share the survey results and discuss the next steps. But Jake knew the process wasn't over. Beyond legal clarity, he wanted to rebuild trust, find common ground, and ensure that future misunderstandings would be avoided. He believed that with openness, respect, and clear communication, the neighborhood could heal from this unexpected conflict and come out stronger. As Jake packed up his things that evening and headed back to the lake, the sun dipping low over the horizon, he felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The path ahead was still uncertain, but he was ready. Jake knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Despite the surveyor's clear findings, changing long-held beliefs wasn't something that happened overnight. To make lasting progress, Jake understood he'd need more than just legal documents. He'd need the support and understanding of his neighbors. One bright Saturday morning, Jake set out to visit some of the residents in the neighborhood. He wanted to share what he discovered, not in a confrontational way, but simply to foster openness and clear up any lingering confusion. He started with Mrs. Thompson. It's an elderly woman who had lived nearby for over 30 years. She welcomed Jake warmly and listened intently as he explained the situation. "I never realized the lake was private," she said thoughtfully. "We always just assumed it was open to all. Some of us have fished there, even picnicked a time or two." Jake smiled gently. "I can see how that happened. The boundaries haven't been clear for years, and some informal use grew out of that. But it's important that we all know the facts so we can respect everyone's rights." Mrs. Thompson nodded. "I appreciate you coming to talk with me instead of making assumptions." Encouraged by the conversation, Jake continued visiting neighbors throughout the day. He spoke with young families, retirees, and couples who all had their own experiences with the lake. Many expressed surprise or confusion, but also a willingness to understand the real situation. At one house, a young couple mentioned feeling frustrated by the lack of clear communication from the association over the years. "We never knew where property lines ended or what was allowed," they said. "Sometimes it felt like rules changed without notice." Jake listened carefully, realizing that this uncertainty had created tension beyond just the lake dispute. The situation was about more than land. It was about building trust. By the end of the day, Jake had gathered a small group of residents who were interested in working together to improve communication and clarity. They agreed that a neighborhood meeting would be a good next step to share information openly and discuss ways to move forward. Jake offered to help organize the event, inviting the association's leadership to join and present their perspective. As well as word spread, more neighbors expressed interest. Some were cautious, still unsure about where they stood, but many wanted answers and a chance to be heard. The meeting was scheduled for a week later at the local community center. On the evening of the meeting, Jake arrived early to help set up chairs and prepare handouts, including copies of the surveyor's updated property maps. When the room filled with familiar faces, he felt a mix of nerves and hope. The association's president, Mr. Caldwell, and a few board members also attended, showing a willingness to engage directly with residents. Jake began by calmly explaining the history of the dispute, the survey results, and what he'd learned from neighbors. He emphasized that this wasn't about winning or losing, but about clear facts and mutual respect. The conversation flowed freely. Residents shared their experiences, questions, and concerns. The association leaders acknowledged past gaps in communication and expressed a desire to improve. Ideas emerged, clearer boundary markers, regular updates from the association, and open forums for residents to raise concerns before they escalated. By the end of the night, the atmosphere was noticeably warmer. While some questions remained, the shared commitment to working together was evident. Jake left the meeting feeling encouraged. He realized this journey wasn't just about his property, it was about strengthening the connections that made the neighborhood more than just a place on a map, with allies by his side and open dialogue taking root. Jake felt ready for the next chapter in resolving the lake story. The days following the neighborhood meeting felt hopeful. Jake sensed a shift. People were beginning to understand, to communicate, and to work together. The association even promised to update their records and improve transparency. But just as Jake started to feel the tension easing, an unexpected development shook everything. One morning, Jake received a letter from the association's legal counsel. The tone was formal and cautious. But the message was clear, despite the surveyor's report and Jake's documented ownership. The association was considering enforcing restrictions on access to the lake and its shoreline. The letter referenced clauses in the original neighborhood agreement that spoke vaguely about shared natural resources and common areas. Language that Jake had never encountered in his deed or public records. Puzzled and frustrated, Jake realized this was more than a simple misunderstanding. The association was digging in, citing legal language that seemed designed to keep their claims alive. He knew he needed advice. Fast, Jake called Alex, its attorney, and explained the situation. After reviewing the letter, Alex confirmed Jake's suspicion. These clauses were old and ambiguous, possibly relics of agreements made before Jake's purchase. But they lacked clear legal standing over his documented ownership. Your deed is the strongest evidence, Alex said firmly. The association might try to complicate things by leaning on these vague terms. Jake sighed. I don't want this to turn into a drawn-out legal battle, but I'm not willing to give up my land either. Alex nodded. Let's prepare a response, firmly but professionally asserting your rights, and keep documenting everything. Jake spent the next few days gathering every piece of documentation he could find. He also kept talking with neighbors, many of whom expressed support, but worried about potential conflict. Meanwhile, Jake reached out to Mr. Caldwell and Mrs. Harper, hoping to open a line of calm communication. Jake, Mr. Caldwell said during their call, the association isn't trying to cause trouble. We just want to protect the interests of all residents. The language in those agreements is old, but it reflects the community's desire to maintain shared spaces. Jake responded, I understand the sentiment, but the boundaries are clear. In my deed, we need to find a way that respects your intentions without compromising legal rights. Their conversation was tense, but civil. Both sides wanted a resolution, just not at the expense of their core interests, determined not to let this dispute escalate. Jake proposed a compromise, a formal agreement granting limited controlled access to certain parts of the shoreline for residents while reaffirming his ownership and rights. This suggestion surprised the association. It showed Jake's willingness to be reasonable and find common ground. The association's leadership promised to bring the proposal to their board for discussion. They also agreed to hold off on any enforcement actions while the matter was being reviewed. As the days passed, Jake continued to work with his attorney, neighbors, and the association to draft terms that were fair and clear. He knew this wouldn't be a quick fix. But the conversation was moving from confrontation toward collaboration at his ranch. Jake often sat by the lake in the evenings, the water, reflecting the changing sky. The challenges were real, but so was the possibility of something better, a neighborhood that respected boundaries and fostered trust, and Jake was ready to see it through. The atmosphere between Jake and the neighborhood association grew cautiously optimistic in the weeks following his proposed compromise. Both sides understood the value of finding common ground, but the details of the agreement required delicate negotiation. Jake, working closely with his attorney, Alex, drafted a formal proposal that balanced his property rights with the association's desire to maintain access for residents. The plan outlined clearly defined areas where neighbors could enjoy the lake, specifying times and activities allowed, strict guidelines to preserve privacy and security, The proposal also included provisions for regular communication between Jake and the association's board, establishing a cooperative committee to address any future concerns before they escalated. Jake hoped this would demonstrate his goodwill and help heal the tension that had divided the neighborhood. At the next board meeting, Jake attended alongside several neighbors who had expressed their support. The room was packed with community members. Eager to witness this pivotal moment, Mr. Caldwell opened the meeting with a brief overview of the history leading up to this point, acknowledging the misunderstandings and the need for clarity. When Jake presented his proposal, he spoke with measured confidence, emphasizing respect, fairness, and the importance of collaboration. "We all want to enjoy this beautiful place," Jake said. "By working together with clear boundaries and mutual respect, we can ensure that everyone's interests are protected." Several neighbors voiced their approval, appreciating Jake's willingness to share access while asserting his rights. However, some board members raised concerns. They questioned whether the restrictions would be enforceable and worried about the potential for future conflicts. Mrs. Harper, in particular, expressed a desire for stronger guarantees that access would be preserved for residents, not just promises on paper. Jake listened carefully and acknowledged these concerns. He proposed including specific terms for regular monitoring and a dispute resolution process, involving a neutral third party if disagreements arose. The discussion was thorough and sometimes tense, but ultimately productive. After hours of conversation, the board voted to accept Jake's proposal, with some minor amendments to clarify enforcement procedures and communication channels. Relief washed over Jake as the meeting concluded. The agreement was a significant step toward peace and cooperation. Over the next few weeks, Jake worked with the association to finalize the formal contract, ensuring all legal aspects were airtight. Alex helped draft the language to protect Jake's ownership while honoring the shared access terms. The agreement was signed in a small ceremony attended by neighbors, board members, and Jake's family. The atmosphere was celebratory, a rare moment of unity after months of uncertainty. Jake felt proud not just for defending his property, but for helping build a stronger, more transparent community. With the dispute resolved, he turned his attention back to enjoying the ranch and the lake that meant so much to him. One afternoon, as he walked along the shoreline with his daughter, she asked, "Dad, will the neighbors come here more now?" Jake smiled. "Yes, but they'll respect this place, just like we do." She nodded thoughtfully, skipping a stone across the water. Jake realized this journey had been about more than land boundaries. It was about trust, communication, and shared respect. And for the first time in a long while, the lake felt like a true home for everyone. The weeks following the signing of the agreement marked a turning point not only for Jake but for the entire neighborhood. What once had been a source of tension gradually transformed into a symbol of collaboration and renewed community spirit. Jake continued to invite neighbors to the lake, hosting small gatherings and nature walks, always mindful of the boundaries outlined in the agreement. Residents who once viewed the lake as off-limits now came to appreciate the beauty of the space and the care Jake put into preserving it. The cooperative committee that Jake and the association had established met regularly, serving as a forum for open dialogue and proactive problem-solving. Issues were addressed swiftly, preventing misunderstandings from escalating. Even those who had been skeptical during the negotiations began to see the value of working together. Mr. Caldwell, the association president, often remarked how the process had taught everyone the importance of transparency and respect. Jake found himself becoming more involved in neighborhood events and discussions, not as an adversary but as a trusted partner. His willingness to listen and compromise earned him respect beyond the property dispute. One afternoon, Jake received a surprise visit from Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had welcomed him earlier in their journey. She brought with her a photo album filled with pictures of the lake and surrounding area, some dating back decades. "This is our history," she said softly, flipping through the pages. "I'm glad we can add new memories without losing what came before." Jake smiled, touched by the gesture. The album symbolized more than nostalgia, was a reminder that the lake had always been part of the neighborhood's story. Even if that story had become complicated, looking back, Jake realized how much the experience had changed him. He had learned that ownership was about more than legal titles, it was about stewardship and community. The fight to protect his land had become a lesson in patience, communication, and understanding. The lake, once a battleground, was now a bridge connecting neighbors. As the sun set over the water one evening, Jake stood quietly at the shoreline, the gentle lapping of the waves, soothing and steady. He thought about the future, the promise of peaceful coexistence, the laughter of children playing near the water, and the simple joy of knowing he had done right by his home and his neighbors. The path hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. For Jake, the lake was more than just a piece of land. It was a place where respect had replaced suspicion, where dialogue had overcome division, and where a new chapter had begun. And in that moment, with the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, Jake felt truly at peace.